All right, and welcome everyone to another episode of Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova Podcast. I'm your host, Mekel Kasanova, and I have with me the one, the only Kevin of CeccPoint News. It is such an honor to have him on the show. Kevin, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. My name is Kevin Cecchine, and I am from CeccPoint News. So if I had to sum us up, we're sort of an independent news organization. We're trying to branch away from sort of the mainstream media, all that you're used to. Okay. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that we're purely objective, right? Because it's impossible to be purely objective. We are subjective beings. Our wills will obviously sort of influence the way that we explain things to you. It's impossible to be purely objective. But what we do is we report news with integrity, and that's part of our slogan. And I think that's what is most important. And in this alternative news revolution that's going on right now, we want to be the #1 place for you to check in to the news. We are where we want everyone who is coming from the cable news networks to go when they finally land on the internet.
Okay, cool. That's ambitious, and I like it. I definitely like it.
I'm an ambitious guy.
Hey, that's the best way to be. All right, and
I think you are too, actually. I think you are too, because I've seen many of your videos, and you're like all about, being a content producer and what it's like to be a content producer on YouTube specifically, and how hard it can be, the challenges overcoming the algorithm. It's very, very difficult. It's harder than it seems to most people, and I think that's something you uniquely understand.
That's one of the things, like I see a lot of people that, and I get this question a lot. They're like, how is it that you get better, downloads and views and whatnot on iTunes and whatnot in comparison to YouTube? I'm like, the YouTube algorithm is just junk. It's hard. Like, unless you're trending or running off of whatever is going, it's hard to get people to tune into YouTube. But there's a lot of people, when it comes to podcasting, when it comes to just radio in general, a lot of people are just going back to the old methods of just entertainment, and a lot of people like podcasts. It's a journey.
Absolutely. I think it might have something to do with the oversaturation. I don't know if it's that. Of course, they're going to push certain narratives. So I understand there's some inherent utility to pushing videos, right, that they think are going to do well because it brings more viewers to their platform, to YouTube itself. Yeah. But there seems to be some sort of a political manipulation going on here as a whole.
Is. Yeah, it definitely is.
Beyond just business.
Yeah. And it's like, if you're not within that, whatever the narrative that they're pushing, you just don't get pushed at all.
Right.
And Kevin, if you can go ahead and give us like a brief background on like what motivated you to just start being active and speaking out, not only on social issues, but also political issues, and going against the normal narrative that the mainstream media pushes.
Because I've been politically involved for a very long time. I mean, I've pretty much always cared about politics. I've always had a passion for, the abstract, and I've had a passion for rationality. And I mean, I've sort of always been, I'll be honest, I've always sort of been on the right a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I think generally speaking, I really began to decide that it was my place to come out and espouse my views on the internet, probably around 2016, around when Donald Trump was running for president. I decided I want to do something with this, because this is my passion. I believe this is one of my passions. I think my more root passion is more surrounding philosophy, but the application of philosophy is really has a lot of overlap with politics. So I really became interested in it, in doing what I'm doing right now in 2016. That's actually when we started CeccPoint News, and around late August of 2016. We weren't as serious back then, but we grew more serious as time went on, and now we're pushing forward in a much more serious way.
Cool, definitely. And what do you think of like? Oh, you there? Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a delay.
Oh. So, what do you think of the term fake news, or just fake news in general? And what do you think its purpose is?
I mean, I know that the mainstream media, that's the funny part about this. The mainstream media, they're the ones who actually came up with the term fake news pretty much originally. And they were lobbying it against alternative news networks. They were lobbying it against content creators online. To try to make it seem as though, if you're not part of the mainstream media, then you're just automatically fake. I mean, that there are no other methods of sort of verifying whether something is true than to, I don't know, go on MSNBC, CNN, or even Fox. I'll be honest. And I generally like Fox, but I mean, they're part of the old mainstream media as well. I mean, they're not immune to this, and I think I think that's where the term was born out of, right? And then it sort of, Trump and the right started using it against them, actually, and sort of, in a way, it sort of backfired, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's also very interesting. They're not used to having their weapons that they create to use against others actually used against them, and they're not used to things backfiring in that way. So Trump started calling them the fake news media, and I mean, it has a lot of validity when it comes to them. I mean, because they do sometimes use anonymous sources, and it's sort of like, I'm not sure if that's real. And a lot of it is sort of narrative sold to you as fact, right? And that's also sort of, I would say, as they would put it, problematic. So I think that's also a factor in it. But I think mostly it brings up the necessity for us to verify the facts that people sort of give to us. I mean, you can't just assume that they're all real. I mean, look at what actually bothered me the most when I saw this. This was like so ridiculous. I think it was Chris Cuomo on CNN when he was talking about WikiLeaks. He said it's illegal. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure it was him who said that it was illegal for anyone else to be viewing this. And that it needed to come from a source like CNN. It's like, what, do you have a special license to look at this? I'm not sure what you mean. I thought the entire point that you're so outraged at, by the way, you're so outraged at, Donald Trump apparently, sort of ruining, I guess, the freedom of speech or freedom of the press. But you're completely fine with occupational licensing in the realm of media production. It's kind of strange.
Yeah. And that's one of the things. It's like, you got so much stuff going on with the mainstream media, and the most recent thing, I'm gonna ask this later on in the show, but you got the whole situation with Don Lemon, and then you got the censorship of alternative news, like Alex Jones and whatnot, and it's really becoming interesting how everything is so slanted now. It makes me wonder, like, what is the real agenda? Is it just to get your news information from like one source, or is it just like, what is it? Because you think about people when it comes to critical thinking now, and dissecting information that's given to them, and people they just take something and run with it. They don't look into it. They don't critically assess or analyze anything. They just run with it, and it's really unfortunate.
That's interesting, because I used to think that sort of they were purely out for directly money, and that this was all to get more ratings, and that there wasn't really much else to it besides that. And that sort of they were just maybe paid off by special interest groups and things like that. But I mean, much more so now, I think that they're actual ideologues. I think they truly believe what it is that they're saying. That's and in a way that's worse. I think that's worse because you can rely on incentives. I mean, that's part of capitalism, right? But it's a part of capitalism that's interacting with the government. And so it's sort of, since it's permeating government itself, it sort of makes it a little different than the rest of capitalism, you could say. And so that's interesting. I really used to think that, but now I really, like I said, I think they're all ideologues. I think that's actually to their detriment too, because they push things, but if they did it in the right way, they'd actually win issues that they could win on and then manipulate the voters to get them to support that and then get the less popular things later on after they've already gotten their, the most popular parts of their agenda through. This is sort of what verifies my thesis regarding them being true believers, because if they weren't true believers and if they were just doing what the special interests wanted them to, they would be more strategic in the way they're pushing their propaganda. They would use the most popular issues. But something, for instance, like Stormy Daniels, like, let's say, just for instance, something like that, like, no one cares. No, absolutely no one cares. But, so it's not like it would make a very successful, it wouldn't be very successful in actually pushing the leftist agenda because it doesn't actually have an effect. Something more effective would be, and by the way, I don't support in any way, I don't support socialized medicine, but that's a popular issue, right, for Democrats to push, because everyone, it's sort of the whole entire topic is surrounded in fear, it's shrouded in fear, right? People are scared about it. So using something like healthcare, right, against the Republicans would be a more effective strategy, and yet they focus in on Russia and they focus in on Stormy Daniels, and I think it's because they actually believe the nonsense that they spew, and that in a way is more horrifying.
Yeah. It really is. And it's that, what was it, the Judge Kavanaugh situation with the lady that accused him, and then now that's turned out that she never met him, or I think one of the outlets I was reading said that she never met him, and that whole thing was fabricated. And there was just so many people that were just running with that, the whole "I believe her" campaign, and it's scary.
We believe survivors, right? We believe survivors. No, I mean the entire thing was obviously it was a witch hunt, right? It was to make sure that they didn't have someone there who might potentially in the future stop their radical leftist agenda. And I mean, I'm not going to say they were to just absolutely destroy him, but it was sort of an all or nothing, right? Because the entire point was, we're going to destroy Kavanaugh and no one will care later on because we'll have won this battle and people will have to accept our victory as precedent, essentially. No pun, well, pun intended, kind of, because precedent in Supreme Court issues, right? Yeah. But what I was going to say was that now I believe that it was one of the last accusers that finally admitted that it was false. I'm not 100% sure.
I think it was.
But I believe it was something like that, and she just completely admitted that it wasn't true. And so I think that's what you're talking about. And I mean, it's not surprising. I'm surprised. I mean, the other ones, to my knowledge, didn't come right out and say that it was a false allegation, but the fact that they're not actively still pursuing it sort of confirms that, because if he actually raped if he actually raped them, and especially with that one accusation of him being a gang rapist, apparently he was a gang rapist. So if he was truly a gang rapist, I mean, why would you let his Supreme Court confirmation get in the way of that? I mean, that seems strange to me. Like, why would you do that if he gang raped you? I mean, so again, it's sort of confirming all the incentives were there to throw a false accusation. The costs of falsely accusing someone are very low generally. of lobbing a false accusation at someone are very low, and the benefits are generally very high, and that's why we sort of have an epidemic of it going on in this country.
So, and this leads to my next question is, why is there such political polarization in the U.S.? Are we really, having a blue wave or more of a red wave, or is this neither?
Okay, so hold on. That's sort of two separate questions. So, I mean, because they're both very interesting and very valid questions. So which one do you want me to answer first? Like, are we having the blue wave, or why is the polarization happening? Because they're very detailed answers for both.
Let's kick it off with the political polarization then.
Okay. Ooh, so this is sort of an extremely complicated situation, but generally speaking, the left, as you know, the way polarization works is that the left is getting more far left, the right is getting more far right, and sort of the center is getting carved out, right? And that's how polarization works. Now, what is interesting about this is that the left is going further left from the center than the right is from the center. I mean, that's pretty easy to see on an anecdotal level. Like, you see that with regards to like Antifa, and there are growing far right groups, but they're far less common, and other people on the right are willing to actually denounce them, whereas no one on the left is willing to denounce Antifa, and that's really interesting. So what that tells me is that overall they're aggressively pushing towards the left in a way that the right just doesn't have. The right usually is able to exploit emergencies better. And the left is able to sort of exploit, I would say, much more our instincts for the acquisition of resources, is what I say. So I think it's highly connected to the left. So here's what I think, basically. I'm going to try to summarize because it's so complicated. There's much more to it than this, but this is how I'll sort of summarize it. So the left, essentially, for a long time, we've been on a continuum. We've been going from right to left, right, for a very long time in this country. And they've been getting victory after victory after victory after victory. And finally, the right sort of is catching on, is like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is what I think is happening. And sort of Trump is, in a way, manifestation. Oh, we got to, right? Hold on. They just noticed, it was sort of the frog in the boiling pot, right? And we just noticed that it got really hot in here. It was going very slowly for a while, and it sort of accelerated. And they made a few power grabs. And what I think happened was the right reacted and was like, no, we have to stop this, because you've just been winning, but you've been winning slow enough so that we would sort of accept it and be like, oh, yeah, I guess, you get this, so we'll let that go. And so what I think happened was the right, like I said, didn't react. Well, maybe they reacted appropriately to it, I think. And go, no, let's stop this. And what the left, basically, let's say somewhat a representation of us actually making a move to halt their progression. I mean, they call themselves progressives, and that's not for no reason. It's not coincidental. They see things on a continuum from bad to good, and wherever they are, the future, what they want is good. So us halting their, quote, progression is, let's say, represented by Donald Trump winning, and they have never, ever experienced something like that, really. Like some sort of like actual standing up to what it is that they're pushing. And they were like, whoa, you can't do that. And so that just caused a backlash on their side, and they went even further left than they were already pushing. And hopefully it'll be to their detriment. I don't know. And we'll find out some of the results of that soon. And there's some reason to believe it might, but there are other factors. And I mean, I don't think it was purely Donald Trump being elected. I mean, you saw rumbles, like early rumbles of that in the 2010 midterms, the Tea Party, when the Republicans took control of the House of Representatives.
Mhm.
I think so. I mean, that's generally why I think how I think the contemporary polarization sort of came to being. If I had to explain it.
No, that's actually a really good explanation. I never really thought of it that way, and that's very insightful. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you.
Man, that really has me thinking now. I'm like, man, I like, that's why I love, interviewing people just to get the different perspectives, because to me it's like I'm looking at it, I'm like, the polarization is so bad now. You have people that are like, for me, I think a lot of people have been questioning, I guess I should answer this on the podcast. A lot of people are like, are you left leaning? Are you right leaning? Where are you? I'm like, there's a point where I was a Democrat because I was raised to be one. Then there's a point like last year where I had my red pill moment and I have started to lean more right, and I was Republican, but I kind of feel like I'm sitting in the center, and I'm definitely seeing what you're seeing, what you were saying, how a lot of the leftists are really going so far left. It's insane. And it's, to me, when I interact with a lot of people, especially a lot of people in California, they really seem to believe that anyone who has the perspective of being right-leaning or conservative or having conservative values, that they are evil, like they're the enemy. And the thing that terrifies me about that is they use a tactic of dehumanizing people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's
absolutely.
And I'm thinking about it, I'm like, these are similar to the tactics that Hitler used. And they're the first ones to say, oh, the right, we got Hitler in office. Trump is Hitler. Trump is this. Trump is that. Oh, the country's going to hell. And I'm like, looking at the numbers are showing we got more jobs. The economy's doing better. We're taking care of America. How is the country doing worse? And when I talk to a lot of leftists, they can't explain that. And they really just center in on how much they hate Trump.
No, I mean, they don't have any. Right. And when if you thought that was a red pill, get ready. Get ready. I have a bigger one. I have a bigger red pill for you to swallow. Just get ready. All right. Okay. So here's why I think they have such a visceral reaction. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think the left, generally speaking, they support the welfare state, right? Yeah. They support an continual expansion of the welfare state in all sectors. What is the welfare state? Let's think about that for a second. The welfare state, in a way, you take out the ethics of it. Obviously, I believe that it's wrong. But even you take out the ethics of it, and you look on a purely Darwinian plane, and what the welfare state does is it allows people to sort of it allows people to acquire resources from other more productive people, right? It allows them to acquire resources from more productive people but let's think about what that would entail in nature, right? So what that would entail in nature would be a huge amount of risk, right? So, you go and let's say there's someone who's stronger than you or more productive or smarter or more productive than you are and is able to, I don't know, set better traps or whatever. And you go right up to them directly and you try to steal the food that they've gathered. I mean, you're taking a massive risk. So what it does is it exports the risk. It sort of offloads the risk from the individual who wants resources onto the state. And the individual, even a very competent individual, even the most competent individual, cannot do anything against the state taking money from them, right? And so there's nothing that they can do. So it allows you to sort of get the fruits of violence without actually having to take any of the risks of violence.
Yeah.
And what do we know about human nature? What we know about human nature is that people are fundamentally governed by incentives. You know, if you make something easy, people will generally do that thing. And if they have a proper incentive to do it, you know, on a subjective basis.
Mm-hmm.
So think about this. If someone comes along, so basically they don't know it, but on a subconscious level, the left sees essentially the welfare state is that which brings them resources. So they bond in a way, you know, the ethos of the left bonds with the state as sort of the, maybe you could say the mother figure in a way, but that which provides them resources, right? Mm-hmm. Essentially, and feeds them, right? And they don't think of it, you know, they never really think about how those resources get there. Maybe they do on like a conscious level sometimes, but what happens is if someone advocates against that, then what does their brain perceive that as? And I don't even think that they think this on a conscious level. I think this is subconscious. Mm-hmm. I think because what ends up happening is you have generations of people who are brought up to be then reliant on the state because they learn that from their parents, right?
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is they perceive someone advocating for any reduction in government spending, any reduction in the welfare state, or even a potential reduction, anything that represents anything that could potentially threaten it as a direct threat. They perceive it as a predator on a primal level. Mm-hmm. So it's not that they hate Trump. It's not that they hate the Republicans. It's that they hate the possibility of, and they don't know this, they think they hate Trump, they think they hate the Republicans, they don't really. They hate the possibility of the welfare state going away because that is perceived as a primal threat. That's why they freak out and they get viscerally angry and they go, no, you know, remember that woman? It's any sort of reduction in that they think they're going to die, right? Because let's say that you're someone who's used to being able to steal resources from someone else. If that's stopped, then that means death, right? Yeah. Essentially for you, like on a primal level. And so they perceive him as a predator essentially through their subconscious. And so, I mean, that just absolutely makes them crazy. And I really think that is why they respond the way they do. And that's sort of my best summary of it.
Hey, that was a fantastic summary. I loved it. You know, because I see it constantly, like, and it's gotten to the point where there are days where I have to just disconnect from social media entirely because I see so many people just regurgitating how much they hate Trump, they hate this, they hate that. And I'm like, why? And if I engage, and this is where I know I should stop trying to engage, but sometimes when I engage and ask the question, why do you think that? And instead of explaining, I get oh my God, I get attacked just for asking that question. Like, how can you ask that? Because I'm curious to understand why you perceive things to be as they are. Like, case in point, here in Hawaii, you have liberals and Democrats have been basically running the state, and they've run the state into the ground. We've gotten to the point, nearly every park near where I live, near Waikiki and around the island of Oahu, it's closing down because we have a mass epidemic of homelessness. And the Democrats don't have any policy or any type of plan to work on that. And now we have a Republican that's running, Andrea Tupiolo, who's on the platform of doing something to, you know, make some reforms, make some things to help with the homeless situation. And yet, if you're out here and you're talking about, you know, David Ige, who's the current governor, you know, you talk about how he's not doing anything to help with the homeless situation, or you talk about anything that's not going with the leftist narrative, people just, they get mad. Or if you question it, it's just vitriol hatred just thrown at you. And that's why I've gotten to the point. I mean, I have a lot of leftist friends. I know a lot of people that are, leftist, and I walk on eggshells around them.
That's believable.
And I know this is not one of the questions I had, but I want to ask you, what is your perception on this, or your take on this whole political correctness that we have going? Because it really feels like it's infesting everything and changing America as a whole.
So political correctness, it depends of what variety, right? Because I think to some degree, right, it's interesting. I think to some degree, everyone's a little bit politically correct, because you don't say certain things, right? But then you want to have a good ratio between, not trying to stir things up too much to ruin stability, but at the same time, you can't have too much rigidity in your society. And so they, I mean, I don't know if they directly believe this, but the whole thought control thing, that's essentially what it tries to do. It's a form of, the censorship, the social media censorship, and everything. It's all connected to that. And it's a form of a modern day book burning. And it's because it is fundamentally connected to the gravy train of resources that people want, and so basically the politicians and the social leaders, right, that come about as a result of the welfare state that we're in, they feed off of the people's desire for those resources, and so they are parasitical on the people, essentially, maybe on very productive people, especially. And so they use the mass population as a way to garner themselves more power. And so anything that could potentially represent a threat to that, including speech, including a better narrative, has to be shut down at all costs. And there's no incentive for them to allow free speech, right? Because anything that could possibly undercut their power has to be stopped. And it's all sort of connected to that. And you notice they're all the same, right? Have you ever noticed, like, all the standards are the same? They call everything hate speech, everything racism. They call everything sexism, that whole thing. And also what's funny about these isms is that they're not really, like, they don't talk about, like, what's actually right and wrong. They don't really speak to someone's virtue, right? Because I could say that men and women, for instance, men and women treat each other differently, and they perceive each other differently. One might, by some subjective standard, one might call that sexist, but I don't care, because I think ethics, virtue, morality, those are objectively sort of definable things. And as long as I'm not violating that, why should I care in the way in which I perceive women? As long as I am not doing that which is immoral, why should you care? Well, you care because it causes me to do something that might threaten the power structure that currently exists. And the best part is how they're able to basically control everything and get people fired for the most ridiculous things, just for saying very, very mild things. They're able to get people fired. And then they have the audacity to pretend that there's some sort of structural power against them, that there's structural racism, or that it kind of drives me insane, because it's like, don't you see the institutional power that you guys have? And you use it against me while talking, as sort of, you use it against me as you're talking about larger systems of power. And notice they never define any of this. They keep it vague, so you can't actually get them to say, so what exactly are you talking about? Well, they go all they fog out on you so that they don't actually have to provide empirical evidence. And it's all part of the same mess, essentially. It's all part of it. It's gross.
No, it really is. I want to ask you, what do you think of President Trump? And do you feel he's doing a good job as president, or could he be better?
Well, look, I think President Trump is doing a good job. Let me just get that out of the way. I think anyone, no one's going to be exactly how I want them to be, right? I mean, I think he's doing a good job, and especially relative to all other presidents, pretty much. Not all, maybe not. I mean, Calvin Coolidge was great, but I mean, most other presidents, right? Especially considering the opposition that he has, and the current year. I think, though, overall, I mean, there are certain situations in which he could have done better. I'm not a fan of, the bombing in Syria. I'm not a fan of the anti-Iran stuff. I'm not a fan of that. I sort of disagree with him on foreign policy. I really consider myself a libertarian. But I do support most of what he says, and I support most of the rhetoric. I think a lot of people get on him about the tweets. It's like the tweets, that's like my favorite part. I have no idea why people get on him about the tweets. For instance, his policy, I think he could push more to, reduce Social Security spending. I think he could do more to reduce a lot of spending that needs to be reduced. He's great on tax cuts. He's done a ton to reduce regulations. And generally, he is a free market guy. So I think that's all positive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, again, obviously, I don't agree with other people's criticisms of him. But I think that I have sort of my own, but definitely he's, an ally of the movement that I am perpetuating.
It's one thing, my opinion of Trump. I like Trump. I don't agree with everything he does, but he's ballsy. He says what he thinks. He takes shit from nobody. And part of me thinks that's kind of the American way. And
it's the American culture in a way.
Yeah.
Right? The embodiment of it.
Yeah, it's like, why is that a negative thing when before that's what we were doing?
He is the masculine ethos of the nation in a way. You know what I mean? He embodies it. He is representative of masculinity in a way that many other politicians have failed to be. And that's another important thing. I think a lot of these social issues are important because they're proxies for government power, essentially, for smaller or larger government. And I think when you have a higher degree of masculinity, I think it's connected because there's less of a necessity for big government, you could say. And that is also why they're so absolutely threatened by a man being masculine and being unapologetically masculine. Yeah. And I think that's a huge thing. I mean, I think the entire, feminist thing is just wretched, but we could go into that when you're ready.
I mean, we can dive in whenever, because I have my opinion on this whole feminist movement. I saw this one campaign image where it had a bunch of naked women and they had the breasts and vaginas kind of crossed out, and it said, grab them by the ballot. And I'm over here wait, so you guys are claiming that men objectify you, but then you turn around and you use a self-objectifying image to push a political narrative? It's so contradictory.
Well, it's okay if the state objectify. They don't actually care about being objectified, right? I mean, that's sort of just a platitude. I don't even know what that means. What are you not an object? Am I not an object? It's sort of silly. It's not measurable. It's not something that we can really look at in an accurate way. What I think it's about is they, again, especially with the feminists, so they've replaced essentially the proper role of the man, right, as the provider in the family. And they replace family. Hold on. Just make sure. Okay, I'm still there.
Yeah.
They've replaced the man with the state, and so the women generally, feminist women, I mean, generally bond with the state and see anyone who is threatening the train of the gravy train of resources that are provided by men who they don't need to get married to anymore. To them, it's like, oh, I get all these resources from men through social programs. And I'm favored in family court situations, and there's quotas and everything, but it's slated against women, and I'm also independent. It's kind of funny. No, absolutely. What it is about is they don't care about getting naked and saying the grab them by the ballot thing, because ultimately they're acting out. What feminists want is they want to be able to act out their sort of most primal desires to, let's say, do a lot of things consequence-free. And essentially the natural consequences are removed. And you can see this with abortion, right? Pregnancy is a natural risk in having sex, right? That's a natural risk, pregnancy. So abortion essentially removes the cost of having sex, right? And so they don't actually care about being objectified. They just don't want any standards for themselves, right? They just don't want you. What they mean by objectified is that they just want to have an excuse to say you're doing something wrong so that they can take more from you.
Yeah. And I've noticed this other thing too that feminists push about the whole body shaming and body positivity, and like you shouldn't tell people that they need to eat healthier or do this. And I'm thinking that's an easy way to kill off a whole lot of people, by not telling them that, hey, you need to have certain nutrients, you need to do certain things to make your body better, you need to work out, you need to be active. And it seems like feminists are completely against that. So.
Oh, okay. So you cut out there for a second. You were talking about the body positivity movement.
Yeah, because they act like being healthy or eating, getting enough nutrients, working out, any type of fitness to maintain a certain physique. Like, I know everyone's not going to have the same physique, but they make it seem like being fat is a positive thing, when all the science has shown us that it's a detriment. Well,
I think it's connected to the standards thing. So they're addicted to removing standards, right? For themselves, of course. Men, all need to be, jacked and 6 foot, and they need to have, I don't know, $1 million and a Maserati, I mean, that's sort of it's sort of funny, because they share that, and then they say, but how dare you have any standards? How dare you have any desires for what women should be? And it's because they simply don't want to have standards, so they can. It's very simple. They want everything without any of the expenses of those things.
Yeah, that's
right.
what I'm thinking.
The feminists, essentially, they want to be able to, let's say, get around a little bit. A lot of them want to be able to get around, but they don't want, again, like I said, they don't want to deal with the costs, but they want men to look at them, but only certain men, right? And this is the interesting part. But if you're unattractive to them, then no, you can't, but you have to guess whether you're attractive or not. So they say no means no, no means no. And then they write things like, 50 Shades of Grey, and all these things are massive intrusions. And they have, like, it's kind of strange. Like, they have two different standards for, categories of men that are, semi-subjective. And it's like, it's strange. So it's like there's no actual conduct. There's no actual standard of conduct. What they do is they say there's a standard of conduct, right? They say, oh, you have to get consent, right? So, but then they just keep expanding on that, right? Because they want to make the costs infinite for males, right? So that they don't have to worry about the advancement of a male that's unattractive to them, because that's on a primal level, that's something that's scary to them. And so they don't want, that's part of the costs of having a very sex crazed society, is that there's an increased risk of that. So they want to reduce that, but also be able to be sex crazed, right? That's why most men, you have a sort of a Pareto principle of men. A few men are having like all of the sex, right? Because, you know, that's just how it works in that situation. When you raise the costs of having sex, when any woman can just accuse you of rape, then, you know, you raise the cost essentially, and that's not the only cost, but also just many other things too, then, you know, only a few men are going to be able to essentially afford having sex. And they don't care, right? Because that doesn't affect them. What it does is it alleviates the potential for a male advancing that they don't want. And they're okay with men going to prison for false rape accusations so long as that's adhered to. We can't just have the old standards that we had where we didn't have, you know, a sex-crazed society. We have to be able to get, you know, the feminists want everything, but none of the cost. Everything. You get everything that you want. And so basically, the way that they do it, they don't explicitly say this, of course. They couldn't explicitly say this. It's sort of, it's implicit, and it's what effectively happens. So they have a standard like, oh, you know, obviously no means no. No one's defending rape. Like no one's defending rape. They pretend like people are defending rape so that they, you know, can pretend to have a point. No, what they do is they say, oh, yeah, you need consent, but you need affirmative consent. And then you need this, and then you need that. They just keep piling on. So it's literally impossible for anyone to follow it, right? So they say, well, you know, you can touch this part of my body, but then you have to have permission to be able to touch the next part of my body. And then yeah, but that only went for my left arm, then you have to get different permission for my right arm. And yeah, but what if, how much time needs to be allotted before I have to give consent again for that same square inch of my body? And it just, so it's useless, right? It's essentially, we can have, because there's always going to be gray area, right? And so they want to make it so bureaucratic that it's literally impossible to adhere to the standards. That's the point of it, right? So that they can effectively accuse anyone. It's sort of like, I think, with a lot of the laws that we have, right? We have so many laws that the average person breaks 3 federal laws a day. I think I've heard this. Don't quote me on this again. Okay. I heard something like that. Something, or you know, around that. The average person breaks like 3 federal laws a day, and a lot of people believe that the reason is so that they can just come after you if they need to, right? If they really need to, they can come up with an excuse to go after you. And that's sort of the same thing. That's why the feminists want to set this up. And I'm not even sure they know this on a conscious level. I think, again, a lot of these things are subconscious in nature. And so effectively, they just skyrocket the costs for men and lower it for them. And they use the state as the means by which they can do that, by throwing men in prison where they're likely to get raped, even if they didn't do anything, which is why they want to remove all standards of proof. Also, they want to make it so they can accuse anyone, and you know, it's just the woman's word, and the man gets hauled off to jail. Right. So it doesn't matter for them, right? Because if they liked it, then they're not going to do that to the guy anyway. So it means that only if you're in the top, like, Pareto principle of men are you going to be able to really effectively have sex. And this isn't like an absolute, sort of a gradient, but pretty much that's how it ends up happening more and more. And that's basically their dream. And I'm not even saying they like want this and they're just rubbing their hands together. It's just it's a biological impulse, and the state is the mechanism by which they can sort of affect this change in society. And this is why I think big government is so problematic. Part of why. I mean, this is just, so I hope I sort of, I mean, there's much more to it, but I hope I sort of adequately answered that.
No, that was phenomenal. I enjoyed that.
At least.
Yeah, that was really good.
Thank you.
That was really good. So the hot topic that's been going on or making the rounds is President Trump pushing to end birthright citizenship for illegal immigrants. Do you think this is a bad thing for the nation or a good thing?
Well, I think it's a wonderful thing for the nation. Here's the thing. I mean, so they're supposed to be given just some sort of special government categorization just because they were born here from two illegal immigrant parents. It seems kind of strange to me, first of all. And then second of all, when you actually look at it, right, the entire purpose, right, when it was laid out, I think the part including the subject to the jurisdiction wherein they reside, or I don't know if that's the exact phrasing, but something to that effect. The whole purpose of that part was so that, you know, people who are foreign born people can't just come over here and have a child and then they suddenly become a U.S. citizen. I mean, that would be nuts for anyone to suggest that. But that became sort of the precedent that people effectively used. And so all this would be doing would be to return to the original interpretation. A lot of people think he's attacking the 14th Amendment. He's not. He's returning to the original interpretation. And the people who sort of came up with this literally said this, and you can look it up. And it's interesting. But of course, the reason they're going to attack it, of course, is because they're attempting. They want to try to use these people for votes, right? So they'll hold these people's freedom hostage for the sake of votes, and I think that's kind of disgusting. I think what they want is they want them to all be legalized because they think they'll be Democrats, right? And they want to sort of entrap them. And I think that's awful. It's a total political game, and it's just kind of creepy that they care so much about that. And I also think it's interesting because it shows that, right? Because if it was really about humanitarianism, if it was really about just, come on, let's be reasonable, let's let them stay, you know, like, look, I can get that, right? I can, like, it's like, I understand why you don't want to drag people out who have been here for 20 years and, you know, throw them in Mexico, right? Just because, you know, they did something wrong, right? Admittedly, they shouldn't have done it, right? But I mean, have some compassion, right? Is what they would say, maybe, right? Forgive them. Of course, they never frame it that way. They frame it in sort of an unfair way where it's like you already owe it to them, even though they're, you know, there's reason to believe that they're disproportionately affecting the welfare state. There's reason to believe that. But it's like, I get it. So I get the whole humanitarian argument. So what this does is it allows them to stay, but just doesn't allow a foreign country to affect our elections. Because here's the thing that sort of baffles me. It's like, I thought you guys were so against foreign election interference.
Yeah.
But when it helps you, okay, when it helps you and it helps the Democrats, then it's absolutely fine, right? And then it's a humanitarian crisis. So if it's really just about it being a humanitarian crisis, then you should be fine with letting them stay, but not allowing them to vote, right? That should be absolutely fine, but they'll never do it. They'll let them be deported and sent back to Mexico before they ever let that happen, because all they care about the votes. They do not care about the people. They care about their lust for power only.
Yeah.
And it's pretty disgusting. And the other thing is, I think this is a winning issue for Republicans, right? There are some issues that aren't winning issues for Republicans that I support. Like, I support a very, very, very free market in healthcare. And other people don't support that. Many people don't support that. There's a lot of fear surrounding the idea of healthcare, and a lot of people don't support that. But when it comes to things like immigration, most Americans agree with Donald Trump on immigration. That's actually a winning issue for Republicans to run on. And something like the caravan, stopping the caravan, which is a literal invasion by definition, and and doing this, saying, hey, we're going to exchange an end to birthright citizenship for wall funding, plus we get the wall funding, we get an end to birthright citizenship, you get to let them stay, right? And what's wrong with that? I don't understand. Like, or even if you took out the wall funding, what would be wrong with that? We all get something that we want, and apparently it's about humanitarianism. So what's the problem?
Yeah.
Strange.
Strange.
It really goes to show who they are.
It does. And, one of the things I look at with Democrats and this whole pushing for, the illegal immigrants, and I agree with you because it's about votes for them. I kind of want to take it a step further, and maybe this is considered a conspiracy theory, but I've noticed that the fact that there are so many African Americans or Black Americans that are not, they're turning conservative. So it's like, okay, who do the Democrats have? They need to bring in someone else that will vote for them. You have groups like Turning Point USA, which, I mean, there's a lot of controversy with them, but they are helping turn a lot of Black and minority voters away from Democratic voting. And that's a threat. That's a major threat. You there?
Yeah, because it's my sorry, it was a little bit of a lag.
Oh,
it's my understanding that if they get lower than a certain percent of the Black vote, that sort of it knocks them out of a lot of swing races or swing districts or states or whatever. And that's really interesting. I mean, that is a major threat. So it would make sense to think, well, we need a contingency plan if something like that were to happen. So that's entirely consistent with their absolute just Darwinian lust for power. We'll just do what is necessary. The means, I mean, the ends justify the means. They say it themselves. They're like, use your enemy's morality against them. I mean, they say these things openly, and still, it's amazing how many people don't see this. It's terrible, awful.
With the midterms right around the corner, what do you think we're looking at happening in not only the political but the social arenas of the U.S. with the midterms?
Okay, so are you asking me to make predictions, or like, what do you mean? Could you hone that in a little bit?
What direction do you think this is going to go? Because we can definitely see how the Democratic Party, a lot of Democrats and liberals, are really rallying up, pushing the narrative to vote. Every time you go on social media, like Facebook constantly bombards you with, you need to vote. If you go on Twitter, everything is pushing a leftist narrative to vote Democrat. And I'm wondering what direction midterms, like with the midterms, what direction do you think the country is going to lean?
Okay. So, all right. So this is sort of a big can of worms. So I'm going to try my best to summarize this because I could go on. I mean, I just actually finished like a 2-hour-long podcast with Henry about this. And essentially, let me just sort of give my predictions, basically how I think things are going to go. I mean, obviously, the Democrats are looking at making some pickups, right? For sure. We're pretty much sure of that, right? But here's how I think it's going to go. The Senate, I think the Republicans are actually going to gain in the Senate. So we're looking at gaining a few seats at the very least in the Senate, unless there's some sort of systemic polling bias against Democrats, which is highly unlikely. Usually is against Republicans, if at all. So it's probably going to be Republicans gain a little bit in the Senate, increase the majority. As far as the governor's races go, the Republicans are going to lose some ground in like a couple races, but pretty much they'll still probably retain a majority of governor's mansions, right? Now, the House is much more volatile, and the House is good for. I know this is sort of not much of an official prediction, but my prediction is a 50-50 split, pretty much. Like literally, it could go either way because it's so close. So much conflicting data on either side to suggest either way. It could go either way. And the thing is, because here's what we're looking at. Mm-hmm. So this is sort of a wave election. So after a major presidential election, usually the following midterms, whatever party didn't win ends up taking the House. Normally, it's almost unprecedented for that not to happen. By the way, I mean, just let everyone know. It's like it almost always happens, and usually when it doesn't happen, it's in like wartime. Some sort of crisis, something crazy is usually happening when that does not happen. Because usually the turnout, it goes crazy for the other side, and the side that is the incumbent, that has the incumbent president, is usually sort of a little more complacent, at least relative to the opposition party. But this time, I still think that's true. I still think that that's true for the most part. But it's a little more complicated though, right? Because we don't have proportional representation. It's not like Europe where it's like if you get, let's say in Europe, you get 55% of the vote, then you get 55% of all the seats in parliament. Here, it allows for elections to be much more localized. So the Democrats, let's say, for instance, the Democrats could be up on an average, the generic congressional ballot, let's say, which averages all of the polling data together. They could be up for all of the House seats at an average of like 5 or 6 points on average. Like that could be real. And the Republicans still retain the House. And the reason that is because all of that blue could be concentrated in districts that are already blue, right? So it could be that the blue wave is all concentrated in already blue districts, and it doesn't have that much effect on toss-up districts, which would mean that the districts that were already blue rising just brings up the average, but still the number of seats that are Republican doesn't go down that much overall. And so that actually is entirely possible. And that's something I think a lot of people aren't taking into consideration here. Mm-hmm. Also, the thing that's interesting about it is that, I mean, there isn't that much data. Like, there's not that much data, and a lot of the races that they're considering toss-ups, there's like 2 polls, and maybe one the Democrats up, one the Republicans up, and it's by like a little bit, but they'll have it as like lean Democrat or toss-up, or even if all of the polls show the Republican is up, there's like 2 polls and they're up by like 5, they'll count that as a toss-up, even though I would think that would be lean Republican. But it's kind of strange, like the way in which they're categorizing things. It really is heavily dependent on turnout. That's honestly was what it is going to come down to, pretty much within what is likely to happen. And we actually, by the way, if you're listening to this and you find this interesting, you want a further breakdown of this, check out, hopefully we'll have the podcast out very soon. Check out the latest CeccPoint News podcast. Should be episode 21, I believe. So we do a huge, expansive breakdown of what we think is going to happen. But generally speaking, the House, 50-50. Everything else will remain Republican.
Okay.
Definitely. But by the way, one more thing that annoys me, it's like my pet peeve right now. They're going to try to say that it's a referendum on Trump. It is absolutely 100% not a referendum on Trump. An example, I believe it's West Virginia's 3rd district, I believe.
Yep.
And it's Richard Ojeda against a Republican. And that is a district in which I think Trump won it by 49.7 points. 49 points. Trump won this district with a margin of 49 points. against Hillary Clinton. So that's like a huge margin.
Yeah.
And Richard Ojeda, the Democrat, who's like essentially as pro-Trump you can be as a Democrat, is like, because he never says anything bad about Trump. He says a lot of really good things about Trump. And he tries to pretend he's a moderate, even though he's not. He is down only 5 points. He's only down 5 points in that race. That's crazy because he appeals to them culturally and he plays on that like a lot. Like he's a veteran, so he plays that card all the time. And he's only down 5 points in a district that Trump won with 49 points. I mean, so obviously it is not a referendum on Trump because Trump still has exceedingly high approval ratings, especially in West Virginia. So it's just, that's a false narrative. And if the Republicans narrowly lose the House, which if they do lose the House, I think it'll only be by like 5 or 10 seats. I think if they do, they'll try to pretend like it's a, you know, a rebuke of Trump. It's not. So I just wanted to say that.
Awesome, man. Awesome. And definitely, everyone, the links to everything from CeccPoint News, from the podcast to the website to the YouTube channel to the social media links, everything is down in the description below. So make sure you definitely check those out.
Right,
and
exactly.
Moving on to the next question, because this has been one I find this so jarring. Okay, what is your take on the Don Lemon controversy of his statement that white men are the greatest threat to this nation, which is hypocritical because he's married to a white guy? So what is your take on that?
Yeah, it's really strange. You know, I mean, it's fine. Like it's always okay to do that, right? As long as, you know, you don't do it against certain groups, right? It's fine if Don Lemon says that, right? And no one cares, no one bats an eye. And then he has the audacity to say that, you know, we shouldn't promote exclusionary politics and, you know, things of that nature. And so, I mean, it just basically, to me, it's just another example of the hypocritical nature of a lot of these media pundits and how they can just get away with whatever they want, and then they pretend that they're railing against the power structure. Imagine if a host had said that, let's say a white host had said that about any other group,
like Laura Ingraham, if she said that.
Yeah, let's say, yeah, exactly. let's say Tucker Carlson said something like even close to that. What if he said something close to that? I'm not going to say it because someone watching this will cut out a soundbite of me saying it. So I won't say it. I'm not going to fall for
no, don't fall for it.
For any leftist trying to catch me. What something akin to that about other groups, right? Then it would be, oh my gosh, it would be on the news everywhere. You know, that they would, you know, maybe like Fox News would be, I don't know. I mean, Fox News would have like a ton of lawsuits. You know, maybe they would attempt to shut them out of the banking system. I mean, they would be ruined. It would be the most horrific thing ever. And at the same time, they pretend that they're railing against the power structure, even though it's all on their side, because there's never any consequences for what they say. It's laughable, is what I think about that.
And, you know, this leads into my next question. Why do you think this growing trend of white hatred, you know, not only, you know, racism towards, you know, white Americans, but just white people in general, and also self-hatred? Because I see a lot of whites that I know that hate themselves, or they blame themselves for whatever's going wrong with minorities. It's the most bizarre thing to me. I do not understand it.
It could be connected to their overall conservatism. maybe it has something to do with that. I mean, I'm not sure. I haven't thought too much about. I haven't thought too much about this issue. I would have to think about it more before I could like extensively. And I need to consider it more to have a more thoughtful answer regarding it, though, because I don't want to just spew something out, especially in a live program, right?
Oh, no worries, no worries. I can. It's just like for me, like when I hear it and I see, and it's usually typically a lot of whites that I've noticed that are well off or doing well, and then they hate themselves for where they are, and then you have minorities that are saying like, oh, that's white privilege, and I'm thinking to myself, if you busted your ass to get to where you are, that's you have the privilege of having the luxury to afford certain things, to do certain things. There's nothing wrong with that privilege. If your skin color doesn't, it shouldn't control where you are in life, and it's really weird, like this whole identity politics that people
what's interesting about the concept of white privilege is that it's not something that's verifiable. It's sort of, you cannot verify it, right? Because you ask them to objectively measure it, right? And then they'll spew off a bunch of sort of out of context statistics, and then you ask them about other statistics that could provide maybe an explanation for it, potentially. And then they'll just say, no, well, that's different. That's different. That's not part of it. Or they sometimes they even fall where they say, well, I think I've heard of them saying that rationality is like even like a white male construct. It's crazy. Like they say the craziest things. Yeah. I mean, they really do. And there's no way to, so it's like, and the thing that drives me crazy about that's sort of connected to the whole postmodernism thing. And I asked them, I'm like, okay, so if it's a white male construct, then how could you possibly, and therefore, of course, the implication is that it's not valid. So if rationality is not valid, then universally, then how can you prove me wrong in my conclusions? How can you rationally prove me wrong? You can't. So it's a self-detonating thesis, because if you say, I rationally know that rationality doesn't exist, and the postmodernists, they say, it is true that truth doesn't exist. They do this. I mean, this is the thing about leftists. I mean, they really do anything to avoid any sort of disproof of what that's why they put out no null hypotheses. And that's so that you purposely can't disprove it, right? Or they bring it up in such a way, and this is the kind of thing that annoys me the most. They bring it up in such a way in which you cannot say anything back, right? They say something about a certain group and what's been happening, but if you're not a member of that group and then you bring up any other statistic that might, explain it, then they just say, well, that's racist. And so they know you can't actually respond to it accurately, because then you'll lose your job. You'll be barred from the banking system. You'll lose everything. You'll, be, completely, rejected from society and ostracized. Then they know that they've caught you. And so you can't say anything back, because if you do, you'll lose all that. So you just have to pretend like it's valid or avoid the argument with them. And I think that's probably one of the most annoying parts about it. They say they want a dialogue, but they don't really want a dialogue. They just want a shakedown.
Yeah,
is what they want. That drives me crazy.
You and me both. You and me both. It is kind of funny because the job I work, I'm surrounded by leftists, and
oh man,
it's just I keep my head down, and I just stay to myself. Because some things just make no sense
until you can make enough as a content producer and an online personality. Then maybe you won't have to worry about it. You know what I mean? That's that's the goal. I know what you're thinking.
All right, winding down to my last couple questions.
All right, bring them on.
I want to ask you about Marxism. So Marxism, it's infested the education system. It's heavily indoctrinating our youth that are going from K to 12 and at its worst in college universities. Why is it that this proven to fail ideology is so prevalent, and how do we combat it?
Okay, so why is it so prevalent, as you know, in the society as a whole, or why is it so prevalent in public schools?
In public schools.
Okay, so I mean, it's sort of connected to why, but in public schools specifically, I think it's hard. I think one of the roots of it is that it's really hard to rail against socialism when, because we know that, people are fundamentally governed by incentives. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to rail against socialism when socialism is exactly what provides you with your paycheck for public school teachers. In a way, some amount of soft socialism is exactly what provides you with it. So you cannot be impartial when talking about these things. It's impossible. It's the same thing when they're talking about, unions. Of course, they're going to teach. It's part of the incentives. They're going to teach public unions are good. Corporations are bad. And government is good, and private sector is bad, and reductions in government is bad. And you want people to starve and die if you want any sort of reduction in government as a whole. And it's because it's nearly impossible for them to be impartial when their resources are directly tied to the expansion of the state. If anything, if you want to ever see someone get angry, talk about not allowing public unions to have the same power that they have. And you'll see a bunch of teachers just go absolutely insane and throw tantrums worse than their than their worst student. That's the thing. It's and it's so destructive, right? Because what it does is it forms a population then that is more likely to vote for the left, that produces worse schools, that then perpetuate that cycle, and it's terrible. It has to be stopped, and the only way to do that, I think, is to introduce competition into school, because anything that is sort of publicly funded fundamentally is going to be infested with leftism, because it's all about money, and they pretend that it's not. They'll throw a bunch of sort of more, and until you disprove them, they get angry, and then they're the union guys who will try to beat you up if you go through the strike line and try to work. So I think fundamentally, I think it's impossible for them to be impartial, and they'll never stop calling for this expansion of the state. And I think that's the root of why it's so prevalent in public schools. It's absolutely horrifying. I mean, I went through public school. I know. And it's not like universities are any better, but the reason is because of all the indirect subsidies that the universities are getting. If you defunded the universities, you wouldn't have to worry about them, but they're becoming like the public schools in a way, just an even more aggressive, more intellectual version of them.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's all bad. I mean, it does nothing but spread. It never gets smaller unless you stop it.
Yeah. All right. You ready for some controversy?
Well, it depends how controversial it is, because this is a live program,
I mean, we're gonna talk about Turning Point USA and Candace Owens.
Oh, okay. I can hit this one.
It's controversial to me because I'm friends with Brandon Tatum and most of the people in Turning Point. But I just for the sake of journalistic integrity, I have to ask this question. But the Candace Owens and Turning Point USA situation with Kanye has been making rounds with him distancing himself from them and the Blexit movement or the Black Exit movement. What do you make of this ordeal? Do you think that Kanye, because he's made the claim that he was used by Candace in order for her to gain more fame and notoriety, do you think that there's legitimacy in that?
You know, honestly, I have no. I mean, I've heard many claims about scenes, but I mean, here's the thing. Behind closed doors, rather. It seems strange to me, though, at the same time as I don't know about that. You know, I assume, you know, she didn't do anything wrong, but, you know, it seems strange to me that he's saying that he didn't know, like, what the message was about and that, you know, these are things that he didn't support. Like, how did he not know what Trump supported? I'm not really sure how that's possible. Like, he obviously knew. He was talking about, it was great when he was on I forget what he was on, but when he said it might have been SNL.
SNL.
He said something like Trump makes me feel like I can have a catch with my son, or something like Hillary makes me feel like I can't have a catch with my son.
That was in the White House.
Or no, sorry, that was in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh yeah, and you know why I think? And I thought, I was like to myself, I'm like, Kanye understands that Trump embodies masculinity and promotes it, and I think that's sort of what drew him to Trump. And maybe he retained some of his more liberal policies in terms of, you know, what he supported. But I think he was overall shifting, and I think he understood a lot of the policies. But to just suddenly shift back like that, maybe it has something to do with it was hurting his career. I don't know.
Yeah.
He didn't, to my knowledge, he didn't call Trump out specifically, but he did call out. I don't know if he even called. I mean, he was obviously indicating that it was about Candace Owens, but it's like, I don't know. I mean, that seems kind of strange to me that you didn't know, like, what it was all about. So I tend to believe Candace Owens in this situation. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really unfortunate because I think he was really being courageous in a meaningful way that I was hoping would continue. And it went on for a lot longer than, I'll be honest, at first I was expecting it to. And it's just, to me, it's really, I felt sad for Candace Owens when that happened, because she made a post, I believe it was a blog post, and she's like, this is a good day for anyone who wants to see me sad, right? And it's like, yeah, I mean, it's pretty sad. Like, it sucks that happened. And it seems like there was some sort of cowardice there on the part of Kanye, maybe. But it just shows that a lot of people feel this way and are too afraid to say it and don't want to suffer the consequences of coming out as that, especially when you're in the Hollywood bubble. Because the immediate consequences of that are too great. The same is true in academia.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of Candace Owens, she is considered she is a very, very polarizing figure. And as of lately, she's been butting heads with not only Tommy Lauren, but also Hotep Jesus, formerly of Turning Point USA. They kicked him out.
Why did they kick him out?
Apparently, he made, according to them, some anti-Semitic comments during that shooting. So they kicked him out following that. Sorry about this.
That's fine.
I will edit that out of the podcast version. Crazy. So yeah, they apparently he made some, according to them, some anti-Semitic comments following that shooting. So when he went to go to one of their events, they kicked him out. And plus, I think there was another situation with someone who was smoking reefer in the White House, which that's so I don't know why anyone would think to do that, but that's some of the things I've heard. But yeah, so she's butt heads with Tommy Hotep Jesus. She's butted heads with YouTuber Anomaly, and also most recently Brandon Straka of the Walkaway movement. But most infamously, she's had a back and forth with this YouTuber called Tree of Logic. So, I know a lot of people look at Candace as an inspiration. A lot of other people view her as a conniving opportunist. In your opinion,
yeah, I've seen a lot of that back and forth.
Yeah, what do you think she leans on that barometer, or in your opinion?
Honestly, seem to like her, but I respect don't. So I'm totally I can't to say whether she's a fraud or something like that. I've seen some suspicious stuff, but I mean overall I it's almost like it doesn't matter because of the effect that she's having is very positive. And I want to focus, until I know more information, I'd rather focus on that because, what is she doing? She's helping Republicans, which means she's helping, smaller government, which is good in my opinion. So I think it almost doesn't matter unless we had more information. I don't want people who are conniving in this, but some people are in this for the money. Some people are in this for the opportunity. And it's almost like, well, as long as, they don't backstab people, they don't do really outright bad things. It's like, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you want ambitious people in here who are going to get the job done better. Yeah. So, I have mixed feelings about it.
Yeah. One of the things I look at it as deep in politics as she is right now, it takes a certain type of person to go that deep in. Like if she was a quote unquote opportunist, I don't think she would have went as far as she's gone now. So, and I'm more of the type that she's helping wake people up, helping people objectively look at things instead of using, certain mentalities, I guess you could say. So I'm all for what she's doing. I just wanted to ask that because that was one of the questions when I announced this interview. It was one of the questions I was getting from the audience to ask you. So, speaking, I guess the last topic for Turning Point USA, YouTuber and activist Lauren Southern, has infamously called out Turning Point USA, along with many others such as Ben Shapiro and other conservative commentators, for them criticizing identity politics, but then turning around and playing fully into the identity politics angle. Do you think that identity politics are needed? And do you think that Turning Point USA is wrong for doing so? It's a thin line.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the goal is to get away from identity politics in a way that it's like I don't think it should be necessarily about who you are so much as the ethics of the situation. Especially with regards to politics, maybe how people socially interact is different, but I mean it's really what it comes down to is if it's necessary for us to live in a more moral society, I think that it's a good thing. So if Candace Owens is waking up a lot of people who are Black, then that's more people for the right side. And so I think, the methods really, I mean, I don't think that the methods are all that important in this situation as long as it works. Meaning, like, as long as it works, I pretty much don't care, with some exceptions, or obviously. Pretty much with very few exceptions, I support pretty much that which works, that which gets us closer, because that's what the left is doing. They're stopping at nothing to get what they want. And if we don't do at least something similar to that, we're going to let them win.
Yeah.
And that's very important to understand.
All right, down to our last two questions. Well, actually,
All right.
this is also a controversial question.
Oh boy.
Oh, okay. So I've asked this to Asian capitalists. I've asked this to Brandon Tatum. I've asked this to many political commentators. But I'm curious to ask this to you. Do you feel that there is a gay agenda that is using the LGBTQ community? And are you also aware of this current movement called Heart Progress, which is basically a movement to normalize pedophilia into the LGBTQ?
So, as far as there being a gay agenda, I don't know if there is. Like, I don't know if I don't have enough information to say that. And I'm not aware of the movement that you're talking about, but here's what I would say. I think it's generally connected to the left's war on tradition that, they're trying to, it's kind of weird because I was like, oh yeah, whatever, gay marriage, right? I don't want to violently attack people for, saying that they're married or whatever, right? But then it comes to no. But you see, that's not enough. The second they're done getting that, because it's not about the ethics of it. It's not about, well, should we force people to not be able to get married? Are you willing to use government force to say, no, you can't get married? It's like, okay, I guess I don't support that, right? But then what happens is that then they say, no, that's not enough because it's systemic violence and blah, 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 all the platitudes that they spew. Then they say, no, you have to bake a cake for me if I say you have to bake a cake, right? So I'm able to use you as a slave to basically make you produce for me if I come in and say it. And so that was the whole bake the cake thing, right? And then I was like, hold on a second. Can we, whoa. So now we're going to violate property rights. The entire point was you own your body, right? I don't want to violate your property rights. Now you're turning right around and now you want to violate people's property rights. If someone chooses to not associate with you, why should you force them to? Why should you use violence to force them to? It's kind of strange. And that it just went to show for me, and then then when that was like sort of a thing, then it was like, oh well, now we have to make up 800 genders and the whole thing. It never ends. You see, we accept the next thing and it never ends, and it just gets more ridiculous, right? And the whole point is because they see it as capitulation. When we're kind, they see it as a way to get a foothold on something else. It's perpetual revolution. It is. We promote our social agenda, and I believe the social agenda of completely destroying that which is traditional is to get us away from a grounding in something other than the state. And I think, so for instance, destroying religion is actually what keeps a lot of people from supporting larger government, rather. And so if you're able to destroy religion, then they ground themselves in the state. And I think it's similar, it's sort of connected to that, in that it is a revolt against everything that has worked well, because I think fundamentally the left is made up of a lot of rejects and a lot of people who, not all, but a lot of people who really fundamentally are jealous, sort of Cain and Abel situation, right? Yeah. A lot of people who just want to sabotage, who just want to, destroy everything because they think it's the system and not them who's incompetent. And I think they think that if they rip everything up and everything that they deem to be oppressive structures, that they'll finally get their egalitarian dream. But the sad thing is that they'll never realize yes, people have different abilities, and there is no such thing as egalitarianism in reality. I mean, people are just have fundamentally different things. So any discrepancy in how people are able to acquire resources, how people are able to do in society, must then, according to their theory, be the result of some sort of inherent structural problem, and it cannot ever just be that they refuse to accept that it could be the individual not doing something correct or not being able to succeed just because they're incompetent.
Yeah.
Or just not able to do things.
Definitely. All right. And my last question.
All right. Hit me with it.
What are your thoughts and feelings when you hear a liberal or a Democrat say that America was never
negative? That America was never great. Well, I asked them, what do you mean by great? I would like to ask them, what do you mean by great? Like, America was never great. Okay, then what country do you think was great? Right? Because all these countries have problems. All countries were founded on some form of violence. Everything. I mean, so then what standard are you using, right? Really? I mean, because we say great relative to other nations, not great relative to some abstract ideal, right? That's the entire point. But of course, it's disingenuous when they say that, honestly, because if they truly believe that, you don't look at what people say, you look at what people do, right?
Yeah.
And so people say a lot of things that they don't actually mean for the purposes of deception, but they're not moving, right? So relative to other countries, at least, they see it as preferable. And that's all that matters when we're talking about how great a country is, right? We're not talking, obviously, it could always be better. That's not what we're talking about. I mean, again, they'll say, oh, Sweden, Norway, blah, blah, blah. And we've done videos on that and the fact that they sort of go through capitalists and socialists, and when they start running out of money, they switch back to capitalism, and many aspects of their economy are capitalist, and they're actually higher on the economic freedom index than we are. And so there's a lot of disingenuous things there. And again, it's like, maybe I think they just say that to have a moral excuse to destroy everything, is what I think. That's what it is. That's what it is. They want to feel good about destroying everything that made us great.
Yeah. Because a lot of my leftist friends, when they talk about how America was never great, and if I ask them to quantify, and this is something that I ask everyone when they say something that's just like a blanket statement, I'll ask them, exactly, can you please quantify what you mean? And they never can. They're like, oh, well, America was never great because there was racism. And then this was taken from the Native Americans. I'm like, okay, if you look at every single country has had people warring over something. The Native Americans did not come from America. They came from the Bering Strait, from Russia. If you really want to go really deep into looking at where people come from, then they're not where they quote unquote are native to. Everyone, it's conquest. So it frustrates me.
And everyone, and a lot of them respected the right of conquest, by the way. And the thing is, it's like, so they apply different standards to America than they apply everywhere else. I was going to circle back to actually something you said earlier real quick.
Okay. And
that was the dehumanization of people on the right. And I think it's that fundamentally, when it comes to them seeing us as a predator and everything, and that it needs to be stopped because the primal instincts tell them that those who are on the right who wish to diminish the welfare state are predators. It's like, well, you have to dehumanize someone before you exploit them. So they're economically exploiting those who are on the right, which is why they're desperately trying to get away from their exploitation through the welfare state. And that is why they dehumanize them, because they need to first dehumanize before they can't look at someone as a human and just be fine with stealing from them perpetually, and their children even more so, to a never-ending degree with each generation, and just think that's okay and live with that and sleep at night. They have to first demonize them and dehumanize them to such a degree where they don't actually care about doing that.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely key in this, I think.
Yeah. Well, that was my last question. Well, actually, I have another one. Did you have fun?
I had a ton of fun. Absolutely. I mean, I could, come on whenever you'd like.
Definitely, man. I'd love to have you back on the show. I know because audience, just so you guys know, we've been trying to get this going for a month now, right? A month and a half, and our timing has always been off. I apologize for that because I've been working some insanely crazy hours at my job, so I do apologize, Kevin.
No problem. I've messed up too. Don't worry.
No,
I messed up too.
But I'm really glad we were able to come together and do this episode. This has been very informative. I'd like to do one with you and the Asian capitalist because I know that that would be.
We have a good. Listen, so I mean, we really like. We've already talked to each other multiple times, so we I mean, that would be a great episode. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if you guys are on Discord, because that's actually how I get in touch with them on Discord. So if you guys are on Discord, I'll add you and we can create a little group.
I actually am on Discord. Yes.
Cool. I need to get your info for that.
All right.
Yeah, we can make this happen.
Absolutely.
But anything you want to leave the audience with? Tell them where they can find you as well.
You guys can find me at CeccPointNews.com. That's CeccPoint news.com. And also you can check out our Facebook. You can check out our Twitter, Instagram, and we're on a bunch of alternative social media accounts. And of course, don't forget our YouTube. That's where we post all of our videos, of course. CeccPoint News on YouTube. It's CeccPoint News on YouTube. And you want to actually make sure also that you get our podcast so you can listen on the audio platforms like audio only, like Spotify and iTunes and things like that. And make sure to check out our merch store. That's always wonderful. We always have new items that we're going to be sort of flowing into it. So all of that. Keep up with our content and make sure to keep watching the Kasanova Podcast, of course. He's a great host.
Thank you, man. Thank you. And audience, you'll be able to catch this. It'll be going live shortly on iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Spotify. We just now have gotten some clearance to get our show on iHeartRadio, which that was completely left field when I got the email from them. But it will soon be coming to iHeartRadio. We just got on Google Podcasts, and we just signed a contract for Sirius FM as well as XM Radio. So it'll be coming to those.
Wow, that's awesome, dude.
But yes, everyone.
Congratulations for Sirius.
Thank you, man. Like, I really have to give thanks to my friend Richard. He really helped really push my show. Like, if it wasn't for him, it really wouldn't be where it is now. I mean, I've been doing this less than a year. Next month will make a year. So this has been insane, the ride. I went from doing a solo podcast to interviewing, gaming YouTubers to this is branched into, people with Turning Point USA to, yourself and your news outlet and with gaming, gaming voice actors. And I'm having, I think one of my next episode is the executive editor for Game Informer magazine, and I've got the senior PR person from Sega coming on the show. This has been an insane ride.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm sure you enjoy every single one. I love doing. I especially love doing collaboration things like this. I mean, it's always so much fun to explain your perspective and have a back and forth, the dialogue. I mean, this is sort of, in a way, it's like philosophy in action. It's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. All right, and people, all of the information for Kevin and CeccPoint News' links will be down in the description below of both the YouTube video as well as the podcast. You'll be able to find their social media outlets, their website, their podcast. Everything is down in the description below. Make sure you go and you subscribe to their YouTube channel. Follow them on social media. Make sure you subscribe to their podcast, Phenomenal Podcast. And with that being said, this is Mekel Kasanova, host of Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova Podcast, and we are signing out. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you.